Happy Friday, Ohio State fans. Welcome back to the 11 Dubcast for Friday, October 10th, the day before the Ohio State versus Illinois game, which we are going to preview today with our deputy editor returning for his second Dubcast this week, Dan Hope. Dan, I've missed you the last two Ohio State games. We've had 11 Warriors royalty in the form of Ramsey Nasrallah and Chris Lauderbeck the last 2 weeks, but it's good to have you back to talk another Ohio State game before it happens. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you, George?
Well, I'm just dandy. Rearing for the weekend. I'm going to be helping you guys cover it from the comfort of South Carolina. You guys are going to be traveling today, as I understand it, so please travel safe. And I hope the weather holds up. We're on the precipice of, as somebody that grew up in Chicago, I can tell you it's no fun going downstate in Illinois during the latter half of autumn, but we're right on the cusp of mid-October, so I think you guys are going to have a pretty good forecast in store.
We've been incredibly lucky this year, just Ohio State football in general. I mean, knock on wood here, but I mean, 5 games into the season, like it's been legit like perfect weather for every game. And it sounds like the forecast is pretty good for Saturday out in Champaign. So, I'm sure the fortunes will change at some point, but so far this season, it's been you couldn't have asked for just better weather than we've gotten for Ohio State football Saturdays so far.
Well, I certainly hope that trend persists through the end of the season to Ann Arbor, but it's hard to call the weather 6 or 7 weeks out, and we got to take it one game at a time. So, eyes on Illinois first. But before we get to that, we do want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor at 11 Warriors and the 11 Dubcast this season. That would be First Bank of Central Ohio. From game day to workday, First Bank of Central Ohio is proud to support the business owners that keep Central Ohio thriving. They are locally owned, business focused, and always in your corner. Give them a visit at fbcentralohio.com. Now, we both seem to have a similar estimation of how this game is going to go. Ohio State's favored by roughly 2 touchdowns. The over under the total, if you will, is set at roughly 49 points. So that would lend itself to a game that ends somewhere in the realm of I guess thinking about it again, it would probably be somewhere closer to what, like I was going to say 30
31-17, something along those lines.
I was going to say 35-14, but then I realized that's 3 touchdowns, not 2. So forgive me. I was not a math major at Ohio State. That being said, most of us have picked them to cover this year, and they've done that, I think, at pretty much every game except for Ohio. I'm anticipating another big win before we get into our actual score predictions, but I'm largely anticipating that on the basis that last week I was hopeful that based on the fact that Minnesota had shown a bit more of weakness to strong passing attacks as opposed to an emphasis on the run, that Ohio State would do what they haven't necessarily done prior to the previous game against Minnesota and start fast, emphasizing the pass. That is exactly what they did, to the tune of a 42-3 win. I am hopeful that they will follow the similar strategy this week. It's harder to replicate that in a road environment, but as you alluded to, the forecast for Saturday is pretty good, so the field conditions should be in pretty good shape for airing it out. However, Dan, you are of the mind that this is going to be a bit of a slower start to this game, and you are the one on the front lines here, so I do value your perspective and insight heavily into that. So I'm curious, what have you heard from Ryan Day or seen with the team this week that leads you to believe that there's going to be a more conservative start to this game than what we saw last week against Minnesota?
Well, I just kind of go off of what we've seen against Texas, against Washington, the 2 best teams Ohio State's played so far this year, where we saw Ohio State take a conservative approach on offense, emphasize ball control, emphasize time of possession, not air it out a ton, not put too much on Julian Sain's plate. And just the way that Ryan Day's talked about this week's game, it's felt more similar to the way he was talking about those games. But, like you could tell, like last week, like going into the Minnesota game, like you just kind of got the vibe, like they're not worried about Minnesota. The way that Ryan Day's talked about this game, he said it several times, like I view this as a top 10 game, like throw the Indiana film out, this team's really good. So that tells me that, especially you add in that factor of going on the road, there's going to be a little more emphasis on just win the game rather than put on an aerial show. So I tend to believe that, Ohio State is going to veer more back toward the idea of managing time of possession, not taking too many unnecessary risks, trying to, keep the ball out of Illinois' hands. At the same time, though, you look at this Illinois defense, they've allowed over 500 yards a game in Big Ten play. So even if Ohio State plays at a slower pace, I still don't know if Illinois can stop Ohio State from scoring a lot of points because their defense for the last few weeks hasn't looked like a defense that's capable of stopping an offense with the likes of Julian Sayin and Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. And so I think if Ohio State wants to put its foot on the gas pedal, air it out, it should be able to do that. And maybe Ryan Day wants Illinois to think what I'm picking up on. Maybe he wants them to think, oh, we're just going to play it cautious again and then come out bombs away. Like, that wouldn't shock me. So nothing would shock me in this game, but it does feel like this is a game where there might be a little bit more conservativeness, especially if, Illinois scores earlier, gets an early stop where they might feel like, okay, we need to play this more like it's going to be a 4-quarter battle.
Yeah, in trying to predict these things, I've taken a liking to not trying to read too much into what a coach tells you before a game because it's not like we're the only people with ears. The other team hears these things. If they hear these things and they consider them credible, they can presumably game plan against them as well. Now, is he trying to put on a poker face and bluff and lead them astray? We can only speculate. What you can more reliably look at is the stats and how those tell the story of how both sides kind of behave. And although it's easy to say throw out the Indiana game, that's an atypical result. And obviously, it was not what I don't think anybody expected. Even if you had Indiana winning that game, which neither of us did, we both picked Illinois to pull the upset. And that obviously didn't go the way that we thought it would. And there were plenty of Indiana fans that showed up in the comments for the Dubcast to let us know as much in wake of that. That being said, I'm not afraid of being wrong. I've been wrong plenty of times before. I said Illinois was probably going to be the first team this season to break 10 on Ohio State or break into double digits rather. And I've picked them to do that. I still believe that they're going to be the first team to crack that because I do think they have a good offense, at least a good passing attack, and that you could make a reasonable argument based on how Texas's season has gone that Luke Altmaier is going to be the best quarterback that they've faced to this point in the season by now. That being said, this team gave up 27 points in its most recent meeting to Purdue last week, who, even though that was a road game, I don't think anybody's really expecting much out of Purdue this season, and they still gave up 27 points on the road. The USC game was obviously close. That was a good upset win for Illinois. They gave up 30 points in that game. That was another relatively recent result for this team. So this defense has shown susceptibility to both rushing and passing attacks when the offense has established itself as pretty consistent. So I expect Ohio State to be able to exploit the defense regardless of what approach they take. I just think it would better suit them for the purpose of taking the crowd out of the game early. And we've seen in previous instances of Ohio State playing in Champaign where if you take them out of the game early, everybody in Champaign just goes home or goes to the bars, or sometimes they don't even show up at all. They can't even get a full eye when they're flipping those cards over in their student section in some cases. So I think it would stand to reason that if you have a similar start to what they did last week against Minnesota, it would be best for them to take the crowd out of the game. At the same time, if they make some early mistakes like they did against Washington, I don't think that Illinois has the kind of run game where they would be able to really milk a significant amount of clock where they would be able to hold on to a lead for a good portion of this game if they are able to have early offensive success. So I feel very comfortable with Ohio State regardless of what approach they take. I just think that given what we saw out of them last week, I would like to see more of that. At the same time, one other thing that we've talked about before this season is the theme of Ryan Day not really wanting to show the full hand of what the offense is capable of until they get to the postseason. That being said, this is a ranked team that they're playing, and Day has admitted as much that in his estimation, this is a top 10 matchup. So I would expect them to be more conciliatory in terms of opening up the playbook for this one than perhaps they would against one of their non-conference opponents.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to hold anything back in a game like this. Illinois is, yeah, again, like you said, a ranked team. Like on paper, I think this is a game Ohio State should win comfortably, but this is still a 5-1 team, a ranked team in a place, a stadium, like you said, where Ohio State has had trouble at times before. So I think certainly this is not a game you go into thinking you're going to sleepwalk through it. This is a game you go into thinking we need to play our best football.
Well, that being said, even though we do play devil's advocate to a certain extent, we have once again picked Ohio State to cover, and we are picking them to win. Surprise, surprise. And although you'll be able to read the full staff predictions when they go up 3 hours before kickoff on 11warriors.com, nobody has picked Ohio State to be beaten by the Fighting Illini this weekend. I think maybe all but one of us have them projected to cover the spread. In fact, it might be actually all of us. Somebody has them tripling up the spread, and I'll let you only speculate on who that is. But if you're tuned into who tends to go a little bit buck wild with the Buckeye scoring predictions, you could probably guess who it was. Somebody that recently appeared on the show. I'll give you a hint. That being said, I have Ohio State winning 42-10. Illinois has pretty routinely gotten at least one field goal on the board in their games this season, so I would anticipate that while the score is still relatively close, they get in the Ohio State territory and get stopped maybe in or just outside of the red zone. They'll probably settle for a field goal early, and then I allotted a garbage time touchdown. And that will be the first time that an opponent scores double digits on Ohio State this season, albeit it will be only 10 points. At the same time, I never assume Ryan Day's ever going to kick a field goal, even though I know it's happened a handful of times already this season. If they are fourth down and close, I assume they're going to go for it and they're going to try to put the ball in the end zone. I was a little bit surprised, though, I'll be honest, relative to the staff average, that I don't think there were a couple, I think, other people on staff that had Ohio State breaking 40 points in this one, but I was surprised that I was one of the loftier score predictions in terms of Ohio State's offense. So, Dan, albeit you are anticipating a more conservative approach, I don't think that you're too far off from what I have speculated myself. So, what is your estimation for how this game plays out?
I went with 38-13, and I kind of vacillate a little bit on that. Like I feel like Ohio State's going to score somewhere in the 30s. I feel like Illinois is going to score somewhere in the low teens, which may feel like a lot with how good Ohio State's defense has been. But I feel like Illinois gets one touchdown on the board. Like you said, they've had at least one field goal in every game this year. They've had two in several games. So I'm going to say that Illinois, I feel like maybe something weird happens. Maybe there's a big play by their defense or on special teams that, kind of sets them up for, a touchdown or a field goal. Something like that happens. I don't think Illinois, I think Illinois is going to be very motivated going into this game to at least make sure this does not turn into another version of the Indiana game. So I do think Illinois is going to find a way to keep the game competitive early. But I do think that in the end, regardless of what pace Ohio State plays with, I don't think their defense is going to be able to consistently stop Ohio State's offense, particularly through the air, because since they lost Xavier Scott, their best defensive back, to a season-ending injury, they've just really struggled in a pass defense perspective. And so I think that if, and like it's almost like you think ahead to that big game at the end of the year. This almost feels like kind of a initial test of that. Like this is a good team on the road. The biggest advantage you probably have over them is your ability to pass it on their secondary. Do you take advantage of that? Do you go in aggressive and attack that? I think like I kind of view it in that regard, like you kind of want to see them do what you're talking about, George, and attack the fact that you have Jeremiah Smith, you have Carnell Tate. They don't have anybody who's good enough to stop them. and you try to attack them that way. But I think regardless of what approach Ohio State decides to take, I think, if they can get the ball in their playmakers' hands, it's going to, in the end of the day, being a long day for Illinois' defense.
Yeah, and I think that really the only way that this game stays competitive, at least in theory, is if we get something comparable to a shootout, given the strength of Illinois' passing attack. But that's much easier said than done against a defense that hasn't even conceded more than 10 points to any opponent this season. So I anticipate Ohio State will be able to throw when it wants to. Illinois would like to. I don't know how likely that is. And I frankly, I don't know how many shootout upsets Brett Bielema has pulled off during his career. I think in theory, if he's going to upset a team, he probably wants more of a grindier result, a lower scoring game based on his time at Wisconsin than a game where both teams are running up the score on both sides of the ball. That being said, they did just upset USC by 2 points, and both teams broke into the 30s. So perhaps it's a new era in Champaign for the beloved character that is Burt. But we both feel that Ohio State should handle business this weekend in what is, at least to this point, based on the rankings, their biggest challenge of the season thus far. It's certainly, we thought Texas, what was almost a 1 versus 2 matchup, was going to serve as that for a very long while, at least until the Penn State game. And obviously, as we talked about on our show that went up Wednesday, both teams have somewhat fallen from grace, particularly the Nittany Lions, who did drop all the way to the bottom of Dan's Big Ten power rankings. We'll see if they can dig themselves out of the gutter that they've fallen into this weekend. I don't know if they're on bye, but who's paying attention?
They play Northwestern this week.
Oh, well, I would hope so, but
you'd hope so.
Northwestern
After
beat
last week, who
UCLA.
knows?
Yeah, Northwestern beat UCLA, and Penn State can't say that. So we'll see how it goes for them. But big noon kickoff, all eyes on Ohio State to start the slate this weekend. I'm certainly looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to helping out Dan and the rest of the beat get some coverage on this game. So I'll be writing up Brett Bielema's post-game comments and pitching in as needed elsewhere. But Dan, I wish you safe travels and good luck this weekend. Thank you for tuning into the 11 Dubcast. We will be back Monday morning with Chase Brown to recap whatever happens in this Ohio State-Illinois game, as well as maybe any other surprises in the Big Ten as what happened with Penn State last weekend. But we'll primarily be focused on the Buckeyes. Until then, thanks for tuning in. Thank you to our sponsor, First Bank of Central Ohio, and we will see you back next week. Go Bucks. Take care, folks.